Hello and welcome. I am, of course, the Restless Kaiser.
I'm Brush and Quill.
I'm Johnny B.
And I'm Alan Paull.
But together we are
Advantage.
Oh, lovely. Who we got here tonight? Rich John is gluing together some O group.
He's actually gluing.
Yeah, Alan is painting some Flames of War for O group. It's all the O group. Nick from Team Clueless Games is like, what's O group? Wardrobe plays World War II. Working and waiting for the soothing tones of MfA. That'll be you, John. Just purse your lip for him, will you? Tony Holton. Not miniatures, but reading rules to GMT Panzer Hex and counter game.
Very nice.
Oh, very nice. Oh yeah, Alan, I bet you do love a hex and counter game, don't you?
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Although I've just bought Triumph at Marengo. Don't know if you know that.
Is that the one about a horse?
Everybody says that.
Well, Chancellor, I'm making quesadilla for my granddaughter with a sore throat. I assume that is a food that I haven't heard of.
Mexican quesadilla.
Duncan FX just primed a whole bunch of little British Napoleonics ready to start printing tomorrow. Still Commandante 73 is here for the Wolverines. I am afraid this is not that show, subs. And no expenses spared in this production, says Roxy. You just like the older guys with the beards, don't you, Roxy? Come on, you know it.
Well, if anybody's got any spare paint, I've got a tiger tank here that needs a bit of paint. It's just, you know, in its desert colours, which is straight out of the plastic one.
Get on it.
I'll lend you some paint, mate. I've got a million of my own unpainted miniatures. That's not including the ones I've given to John to paint, or the ones I've given to Brush and Quill to paint.
I've got some.
There's a theme here.
I have got some half-painted French Napoleonic field artillery from when I was 17, and I'm now over 65, and they still haven't been painted. See, it never stops. It never stops.
It never does stop.
Yeah, that. Oh, actually, I can't remember that Hinchcliffe. I think Hinchcliffe, 25. I think. God. Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, what hobbying have we got on the table, Kaiser? Are you doing anything tonight?
Ooh, hobbying tonight. I am working on getting the base kit. You remember I said Gary Saffron 69 as his TT combat. This is just getting some base colors on. We're going to have about 14, 15 of these. We're going to have a French town in 28 mil for bolt action.
Wow.
I'm putting the base coats on. Then Johnny B is going to, as the Irish would say, jizz it up a little bit. There's the phrase for you for this evening. Is that not right, Johnny? You're going to jizz it up?
I mean, I'll do something to it. I'm not sure if I've got enough in the tank for that.
In you? Right.
No, Callum, what you got?
I'm doing some more work on my little Black Templar Dreadnought dude here.
Nice.
Is that a plastic one or an old school brick?
It's an old plastic one with metal bits on it.
Oh, boo, boo, boo. I'm doing... Remember those... What company was it, Kaiser, that gave you these pre-painted doofers?
They're called Micro Art Studio.
That's right, Micro Art.
Yeah.
So, got a few of those. I'm just finishing off some of the,
very nice.
I don't know, dove cotton, a tin shed.
Nice.
And yeah, so I'm going to do that whilst I listen to the magnificent Alan, sir. Can you do us a favour and tell us sort of about yourself a little bit? Who are you?
Oh, who the hell am I? I am the owner of a company called Surprise Dare Games. There's our oops. I was going to say there's our logo at the back there.
Self-portrait, is it not?
Self-portrait by Tony Boydell, who used to be with us. He does those sketches. And I'm a game designer. I've been a game designer for a lot of years. Well, I theoretically at least started when I was 11. And at that stage, I made a game kind of very, very innovatively called Battle with an exclamation mark at the end. And it was
not a question mark. Okay, that's good.
And it was basically Napoleonic style sailing ships which would sail around the world, and if they encountered each other, they would fight by rolling dice. I've still got that. I've still got it in a box somewhere. I must get it out and see how crap it was. But yeah, so I started off doing that, and then back in them days, late 60s when I was at school, getting actual war game rules was incredibly difficult because there was no internets and things, and there was no actual games. There was no war games, miniatures games publishing companies really. So we just had to make our own stuff up, basically. And so I wrote some Napoleonic rules. I wrote some 7 Years' War rules based on information I could glean from the library.
Library is the source of all knowledge.
Went on from there, really, I guess. So I've been doing that ever since.
Sorry, since you were 11. That's a long old time.
It was just a long time, yeah. But my first published war game was in 1983, a game called Siege, part of the Cry Havoc series. I know that's nearly 40 years ago, which is ridiculous.
I'm not even born. What's going on? Oh my god!
You're not even an ambitious look in your father's eye at that point, are you, John?
No.
Siege was a skirmish game, which was part of the Cry Havoc series, which was quite a popular series. And in fact, there is still a fan base which produce more add-on materials for that game system. It's still a game. If you look up Cry Havoc, not the new Cry Havoc, but the old Cry Havoc, if you look that up on the internet, you'll find the old Cry Havoc system, which is which was an old skirmish game with little counters. It had double-sized counters for knights, full color.
Wow!
Full color. Things with such enthusiasm.
It was unbelievable. Each individual knight was a different guy. Different livery.
Different guy. Each one. Each one was a different guy.
These were painted by Peter Dennis, who people will know from Osprey, I think.
Osprey. I've heard of Osprey.
But Peter Dennis is probably the most famous military artist around.
I've heard of Les Dennis.
He did all the artwork for that. But anyway, that's my kind of pedigree. But since then, and more modernly, I was co-designer of a game called Airfix Battles, the introductory war game, which was published by Modiphius in 2016, working alongside Nick Fallon and Chris Birch. And I recently redeveloped Kingmaker, the old 1970s Wars of the Roses game, which I think we talked about at a previous show.
That is even a playthrough. Go check it out.
Yay.
You can see how confused Alan and his co-designer is at how I play. It's like this guy's playing it all wrong.
That was good fun. It was somewhat eye-opening for us, yes, but it was good. It was good fun.
That told you about murdering people at conventions.
But that game was successfully kickstarted in October. It ended on 14th of October, and it is now in production, and it's coming out March 2023. So that's something to look forward to from Gibson's Games. And so that's my pedigree, really.
That is your pedigree. So I then went away and watched, because you collaborate with a YouTuber called Bev, and I can't remember what Bez's channel is called.
It's called Stuff by Bez.
It's called Stuff by Bez.
I know, it's innovative, yeah. But Bez is a force of nature, and she's
quite the character.
Oh yeah, absolutely. She's a very prolific and talented game designer. Doesn't do war games at all, really. She does mainly party games, but has been very successful on doing party games. But she also live streams every day, which is
Mhm.
pretty damn amazing.
And for diversity reasons, she occasionally grabs a few oldies and brings them on, like you, right?
That's basically it.
Yeah.
We actually have every fortnightly Wednesday bletherings about usually about some aspect of game design. We're currently doing an ambitious project of working through all this building blocks of tabletop game design. This book, which is by Jeffrey Engelstein and Isaac Shalef. This is basically an encyclopedia of all the game mechanics. Which is used for categorizing things on Board Game Geek. So I mean, it's huge, and we are theoretically working through all these, although we're still only on A. So I think it'll probably take us about 20 years to get through.
Yes, and that's I watched a couple of those. They're actually you're actually quite technical about this stuff as well.
Oh yeah,
I think a lot of us. The thing about game design is a lot of us have done a little bit of it. At the very least, almost everybody's done a bit of house ruling in their life.
Yes,
when they're not happy with it. Many of us have, written as kids, written up weapons tables for an alternative to D&D and so on. I feel an axe should do more damage, so I'm going to create my own weapons table. Because when you're 14, you're that arrogant and you think that it makes that much difference. So can you understand that the average difference between a D6 and a D8 is 1?
Yeah.
It's not that big a deal, mate, honestly. Not when other numbers go into this calculation. But anyway, so I think it's interesting to speak to someone who's actually sort of professional about their games design with a kind of understanding of the rationale around those mechanics and a bit more. Because I think one of the things that stops a lot of us from fulfilling it, I'm the guy who's written 10 different games in his life that I've never finished, right? Because invariably I reach a point where I'm not really happy with how it works, with how some aspects of it works, and the ways that I can think of changing it, I don't like.
Yes, that's understandable. Right? I think lots of people do try to do games. The thing I always say to people who want to do game design is the most important thing is to finish designing the game, and that's the most difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
But if you're not actually able to finish designing it, you haven't actually achieved what you're aiming at. So it's just to go away and design games. I mean, most game designers are kind of driven, really. You kind of have to. It's a bit of an arty thing, I suppose, and that's why I started. I felt, in fact, the first thing that made me think maybe I want to do this was playing Formula One. Do you remember that game? It's a bit ancient history. It's an old Waddington.
You mean Formula Day?
No, Formula One, the old original. I think it was a Waddington's game where you had. It was a Formula One racing game, and you had a pack of cards. We were talking about cards before the show started. They had a pack of cards, and one of the cards is superb driving. You can take a corner at any speed you like. Great, fantastic. It's a really good kind of storytelling type of game. And you have tire wear and brake wear. And if you speed around the corner too fast, your tire wear goes down and your brake wear goes down. If you lose all your brakes or all your tires, funnily enough, you spin off and you have to start up again. So it's all about managing the wear on your tires and the wear on your brakes, so you can minimize the pit stops you can do. So you have to judge how fast you want to go around the corners and all this kind of stuff. And you've got these cards which help you to get rid of some of the peril. And I thought to myself, well, somebody must have actually designed this thing. It didn't just appear out of nowhere. And I quite like to have a crack at doing that kind of thing, really. I would love to hit the dizzy heights of selling as many games as Formula One sold, but I haven't reached that stage yet, really. But the realization that people actually have to design these games is an important one. They're not designed by some games company committee somewhere that somehow dreams these things up and they appear out of nowhere. Somebody has to sit down and actually do the hard graft of working out typically nowadays, working out what their player experience is going to be. That's where people often start. And that means then that will go on to what mechanics do you want to use to evoke that player experience. And that's where things like that book really can come in handy. If you haven't done a lot of game design before, you can look through the mechanics and see the kinds of things that might work.
Consider the impact. Can I just check? I'm a bit concerned that we've skipped a step, or I'm going mad. Did we cover what other people are hobbying other than just me, or did we just skip straight into the chat?
Yeah, no, you're doing that. Callum's doing a thing, and I'm doing the little buildings.
Oh no, we did. Okay, yeah. Now you're showing me. I was like, I feel we just skipped straight past this because I couldn't remember doing it. Can I go back to the chat and then we'll carry on because a lot of other people joined as well. So we had Roxy. So Saffron69 joined. He's building. He's building the other 7 of these.
Right.
Nice. Mark Long is building foreground scenery for Dead Man's Hand. Nice. Dead Man's Hand enthusiasts, I recorded an interview with Stuart McCorkadale at Selwig a couple of weeks ago. There's quite a bit of information about that. If you like Dead Man's Hand, next year is going to be a big year for Dead Man's Hand. It's the too long didn't read version of that. That interview's not out yet, but it will be out shortly. It's in the members area. Not happy with the rules that came with my 2 mil figures. I guess I'll stick to 28. I think got a very different system for 2 mil. This is how behind we are. Roxy the Riveter, John, she got some advice for you here. Jizz it right on up, mate. That's what you need to do.
Jizz it on up.
Hey up, La. Action Axis catches in the rerun. Rosie is here. Tony Holton says Cry Havoc. So there's that. JVC Paints has joined us. Lazy Pirate Painting is here. And Crossing Obstacles Gaming. Tony Holton. You and Avalon Hill are responsible for the good bits or the bad bits. Who knows?
Who knows?
Names and addresses not available. Johnny, do you use Army Paint a strong tone dipping pot?
Does somebody want it?
Oh, because you can see it in the background. Mate, I've got one.
Do you want it, mate? Saffron, do you want it? It's just sitting there. I used it once and I was like, this is whack. Yeah. So if you want it,
I'm going to smell it.
Have it. Well, it smells lovely. It tastes all right.
Makes your tongue all shiny.
You need a mixer. You need a mixer if you're gonna taste it. You need a mixer with it for sure.
That was marketed as the new wonder drug for painting, wasn't it? Everybody bought a tin of that stuff. Everybody's still got it 15 years later.
Yeah. I painted a whole Bretonian army out of it.
I use it. I use it for my 6 mil stuff.
I use it for my fence outside.
It's less toxic than creosote, but only slightly.
I wonder if it is just Ronsil.
Shaggers and Spruce. Some of the Macedonian high pacifists. Nice. Rubicon Luftwaffe for Flak 88. Like Bickle, it certainly is.
It certainly is, yeah.
Okay.
I've got a question.
You got a question?
About game design. Is it easier to start with adapting, or is it better to just go straight into writing?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's probably easiest. It's probably easier to adapt. So it's probably easier to take a game and you perhaps don't like a little bit and just change it, because at least you've got a framework there to work with. Then you'll get into the idea that you can actually do that and it works. I think the important thing is to get some successes. Actually, get some little successes. Do some work. Get a game. Put it in front of people. And see that it works, because that's a really good fillip for your ego, which helps. Because if you keep doing things and it's crap all the time, it's a bit discouraging. So start somewhere and get some stuff that works. And I think modifying. I mean, the classic thing that board game designers do is modify Monopoly to make it into a better game.
Well, it's just like
that's impossible.
I know it's such a brilliant game already, but some people do.
I saw an advert for Trap Scrabble the other day. The special trap cards. I don't.
No idea.
Yeah. You talk about modifying games. Somebody's updated Scrabble.
No, you're all right.
It's a thing. Yeah.
You're good.
All right. So let's. You talked a little bit about it. You've done board game stuff. You've done a miniature war game. You showed us a book before the show. You've written for anyone that wants to play an enormous World War II game.
This the enormous
this
World
is
War II game.
the kind of game you play with like 12 people, right?
Yeah, Mission Command Normandy. It's got a reference manual and a player's manual. That's
telling you something there, isn't it?
But you just need those 2 books, and then you print out the rest of the materials. But it's a World War II. It's a proper hardcore World War II miniatures game with. Well, I'll use that as if I use that as a reference, as a reference game. This is This is kind of a simulation game. It's umpired. I'd say our average game size is about 6 a side. We play for a whole day, and we're usually using a table maybe 12 foot by 6 foot, something like that. So it's quite a big game, and because I played that with a keen group of war gamers in Frome, Somerset. Some of whom are military or ex-military, so they know what they're doing. They know what they like. They like big games, and that's a World War II game. And what we've gone for there is. And
you play all that with those grubby unpainted miniatures you were showing me?
No, not unpainted ones. No, God, no. We're not that bad. We're not that bad. But we're going for authenticity. So what we're trying to do with Mission Command Normandy, the basic philosophy of this, which is very different from modern games, is that what we are trying to do, and I quote, is we attempt to capture the essence of combat command from roughly company level to division level without the bloodshed, fear, death and destruction normally associated with actual warfare. So what the rules are doing is helping players learn more about the effectiveness or otherwise of a national army's way of fighting during World War II using tabletop miniatures. So the basic idea there is that we are trying to reflect at least part of the command and control of the troops. So that's why I'm saying this is a kind of more of a historical modelling type of game, where that's what our players wanted in our Frome group. They wanted to be able to fight. If you've got a Panzer division, you want to have that feel very different from a Russian tank corps or a British armoured division in terms of command control. So the rules reflect those differences. And one of the ways we can do that is by using umpires, because we have had people literally not knowing anything about the game before. They'll arrive in the morning, and within an hour they're playing fine, because the umpires are dealing with the rules complications, and the players just getting on with doing what they think, I don't know, a Sherman battalion should do, or a Tiger battalion. We had a new guy come in, play a Tiger battalion. And he did within an hour or so, he was commanding that Tiger battalion very, very well. We're using it partly as a way of teaching too. One of the things, for example, that we get our players to do in that game is make effective use of smoke, because that game is very unforgiving if you don't do proper relatively historically accurate tactics. So if you do the classic World War II wargamer thing of you got a bunch of American Marines and you charge the machine guns, you will get mown down. You will not
get medals for that, though. That must be good.
Yeah, man.
You will not successfully
get medals
charge
for
those
it,
machine guns. Yeah.
Must be good. All right, so we're talking at quite a high level of abstraction, but I think what's always nice to do is kind of drill it down into specifics and to talk in a little bit more, a little bit more drilled down to get people stuck on it. So let's start with something simple. Let's start with the dice that you roll.
Yes,
it's one of the things I've had. So to the fans of the show that are interested in bolt action, which I know many of our viewers are, for example. One of the kind of insights that we were given by hanging out with the Warlord crew a little bit more at their events and filming them is that Alessio Calvatore and Rick Priestley really don't agree on whether it should be whether D6 or D10 is the way to make a battle game. And I find that inherently interesting, because the idea of it moving to D10s kind of churns my stomach a little bit. It's just not right.
Okay, well, I'll go to Airfix Battles in this, because Airfix Battles, the introductory war game, what we were trying to do with that game is, because it's supposed to be, and it is an introductory game, it's not for your heavy specialist guys. So we went with simplicity, and the simplest thing in terms of dice is a D6.
Yeah.
So we went with D6s. People understand D6, or at least they think they understand D6s. Particularly if we're not necessarily doing 2D6s and having to go into 1 in 36 chances. We're just rolling D6s, and each unit has got each unit in Airfix Battles is defined. Usually, it's a squad of 10 men. If it's 10 men, you'll roll 10 D6s, and if it's a kind of regular squad, it'll be 5 or more to hit. So you roll 10 dice. Every 5 or 6 you roll is a hit. That is really, really straightforward, and that's. So for the introductory game, we went for that approach. Now that I'm contrasting that with the approach we had at Mission Command Normandy, where we want to have the situation where if you charge the machine guns, you're going to get mown down. So in that game, we're using much more historically accurate hit chances, and we're using suppression, a concept of suppression. You're rolling D20s to hit. D20s are nice. D20s are nice because you've got a 5% per increment, which makes sense. You can easily calculate that, which you're ready with that. Whereas 1/6, what's the 1 in 6 chance? Can you actually imagine what a 1 in 6 chance really? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So the Airfix Battles has that simplicity. Also, in Airfix Battles, we decided squares are much simpler than hexes. Well, they're fundamentally simpler because there's only 4 sides to a square and there's 6 sides to a hex. So rather than doing hexes, we went with squares because people understand a squared grid. That is also actually simpler than a conventional miniatures game where you measure things, because we all know if you measure things, you're trying to measure 10 centimeters or whatever, and somebody's going to measure it as 10.5, and they're trying to get away with edging forward a little bit more, and you have arguments.
John.
Nadgery.
Exactly.
We call that nadgery. We don't like nadgery.
Exactly. Yeah. So with squares, you move your squad from this square and you move it to an adjacent square, and that's 1 point of movement. And squads generally have 2 points of movement, so you can move 2 squares. You can't move diagonally. You can only move horizontally and vertically because it's nice and simple and straightforward. And if you're measuring range, you always count horizontally and vertically rather than diagonally, so you avoid all those diagonal problems. And you ignore the fact that counting horizontally and vertically doesn't give you exactly the same distances as doing it kind of point to point, because it's near enough. And all we're looking for in a nice, simple introductory game is near enough. So the stress in Airfix Battles is getting it nice and simple and straightforward. So basically, people can look at the first scenario, read a little bit of rules, and get stuck straight in. The idea there was you take it out of the box, and within a quarter of an hour, you could be playing a game. And you can do that with Airfix Battles, and then it builds. In the first scenario, I think you've got an officer and a couple of squads each side, and we just introduce it like that. So you're rolling your bunch of D6s, fives are hits, and if you're in cover, you get a save. So each hit you just roll a dice to save against it. Each unit has a war dice value, which will normally be 5+. So that's both to hit and also to save against being hit, 5+. If it's that kind of unit. If it's an elite unit, it might be 4+. If it's a tank, it'll have an armor value when you're rolling against the armor value. So it's nice and straightforward, and we build the rules in Airfix Battles scenario by scenario. So you start with just infantry and simple terrain. You build in tanks, and you build in anti-tank guns and half tracks and things like that as you go through. So by the time you've gone through the whole lot of the rules, you're in a position to do like a 20 point per side, completely free form building of your own force, fighting a fairly large game. So in terms of in the game design sense, what we were aiming at there is get people into the game really quickly. Ideally, it's people like it's like a parent playing the game with their child.
Yes,
that's what that does happen a lot with Airfix panels. It's getting the youngsters involved really early in their life. So
Yeah,
go on, replace the older war game community eventually.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. That's one of the things we're aiming at. Now, to make it interesting,
you totally dodged my question there, Alan.
what was the question?
D10s.
It was about D6s. Well, I was saying I would use D6s in this nice, simple, straightforward game like Airfix Battles.
Yeah.
I think you have to use the type of dice in all the games that I designed. The type of dice I'm using is what I think will best reflect the aim of that particular game. So I'm dodging your question, and I don't have a preference. It depends on the game. So Mission Command was actually the original design. Mission Command was based on the old War Games Research Group 1925 to 1950 infantry and armor. Do you remember those?
Phil Barker games. Challenger 2000 and the Challenger series was basically that updated, right?
Yeah.
And I played those. I played in the Nationals as a kid. In Ultra Moderns. Yeah. No, I got hammered with the local. I went with the local club, but anyway.
But I think that the WRG rules used 2d6 rolls. I think
that you shot on D20s. Or by the time it was on like Challenger 2000 or whatever that was called, the version of the 90s.
Yeah, but I switched when we were doing Mission Command. We switched to D20s because we were trying to get a much more historical feel. The problem with using D6s if you're using single D6s, the rarest thing you can have is 1 in 6. And or for playability, you could have 1 in 6 for a hit, so 6 hits, and maybe you get a save. But that's as far as you can go. I mean, and it's not granular enough for the hit probabilities. You know, if I only need a 6 to hit, then I'm just going to get as many dice as I possibly can and roll as many dice as I possibly can because I'm going to maximize my hits with that. But if I've got a percentage chance to hit of with a certain weapon, I can reflect that in D20s much more readily.
Yes. But you see, I think you're falling into a trap of perception. I think you're falling into a trap that believes that because you can express it as a percentage, it's somehow more realistic or more accurate or more credible. Because I've played a lot of role-playing games, and D20 is an immensely swingy dice to be rolling. And although you said you can roll 1 D6, you can have a range between 1 and 6. Who says you only have to roll 1 dice?
Oh,
you roll 6 D6 and you get a whole bunch of numbers in the middle. You know,
but you change the gaps, if I remember rightly. So when you roll 1 D6, the difference between a 3 and a 4, a 3 plus and a 4 plus is huge. But when you roll 2 D6, the difference between a 7 and an 8 is not
relatively small.
Big.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there are mechanics out there.
But I think when you roll a D20, the increments are reverted back to that difference between a 10 and 11 is reverted back. That makes sense. But you can do it in smaller increments.
Why was 6 scared of 7?
I don't know.
Because 7, 8, 9 numbers.
Boom.
Numbers.
That's what you're doing there, Johnny.
Dice can be problematic. They can be problematic.
But there's no reason you can't require numbers of successes. Is pretty common on Candy King games, right? You roll a bunch of dice, and success is based upon numbers. So to hit you in the open, I need to succeed. To hit you in cover, I need to get 2 successes. To hit you when you're in cover and concealed, I need 3
you
successes.
You can do that, yes.
Yeah, there are other ways of expressing it.
Yes.
And the reason I say this, and I'll be really interested in the chats. If you are pro D6? It's like, because I think anybody that's happy with the D10 is happy with the D12, is happy with the D20. They'll roll anything you like. But when you're wargaming, are you attached to the D6? Just write D6 if you're attached to the D6 in the chat. Because I passionately am, because of the complete reverse of what you said. I've never enjoyed, having grown up with WRG 6th and all that kind of stuff, a big list of modifiers, because these modifiers especially you talked about that Mission Command Normandy. On that level of abstraction, these modifiers, they're not on the table. They shouldn't be. That's not what commanders are concerned themselves with.
Oh no,
so
well
that guy, that particular platoon, their machine gun team is in a wooden potty house, whereas the other two guys are in this brick pigsty. I was like, I as a commander do not care about this.
No, but at that level, there are not very many modifiers in Mission Command, to be honest. The modifiers are generally to take into account to take D30. Love it.
I did have one.
The modifiers are generally to take into account the disparities of big disparities in weapon systems. One of the things that, for example, I would use is needing some way of measuring the gun on a Panther is very different from the gun on a Panzer IV. It has
and that's the number you add to the D6.
It has a profound effect on the effect. Now, but Mission Command is really at what I would call battle group level. It's not at individual weapon.
Well, you said it. You play it with a couple of brigades, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a dice roll doesn't just represent one shot. A dice roll represents a range of firing over a period of, say, 10 minutes. So it's got a different meaning. Well, one of the things we do with that, and this goes back to historicity. If I'm doing a historical simulation-y type game, we do the 88 mil, the 8.8 centimeter anti-tank gun test, which is basically you stick a battery of 88s on a ridge in the North African desert, 2,500 meters away from a battalion of Shermans. And if the Shermans can reach the target and destroy the 88s, the system's crap, because that should never happen.
Because we have loads of examples of that not happening. Yes. Yeah.
But a lot of systems will allow your Shermans to do that. Typically, you get this situation where in a lot of wargame systems, the anti-tank gun opens fire. Therefore, the tanks see the anti-tank guns and they immediately take the anti-tank guns out with shells. Now, this is why I go for the historicity on this with Mission Command. That doesn't happen if you've got a decent range. So those 88 mil guns at 2.5 kilometers away, they open fire, and the Shermans don't even know where the fire is coming from because they cannot see those 88 mil guns. So the Shermans take a load of fire, they move towards, if they want to try and overrun them, they move towards the guns and they still don't know where they are. And they just get creamed before they can actually do anything useful.
Yeah.
Now, Airfix battles is different, because what we're trying to do with Airfix battles is we want people to get stuck in really quickly. You notice on Airfix battles, the board size is quite small. It's the one board is 7 squares wide and 5 squares deep, and tank guns have got a range usually of 5 squares. So when you deploy, you're pretty much in range. You will usually be in some form of cover, but you're almost starting in range. Your infantry isn't necessarily starting in range. Your infantry machine guns start in range of 4, I think, in that game. Because we don't want people faffing around with lots of pre-shooting maneuver. With Airfix battles, we want people to get in there, get stuck in, and get on with the shooting side of things.
Yeah.
Because it's not supposed to be a model of World War II combat. It's supposed to be a fun knockabout game where dramatic things happen. You've got the idea that the squad's been wiped out, and you've just got the lieutenant left. He's the last guy in the squad, but he can't get shot because people keep missing him, and he eventually, I don't know, storms a position on his own, that kind of thing. And that can happen and does happen in Airfix battles.
So you get a VC.
That's what we want to happen in Airfix battles. We want to have that. But the 2 remaining guys with the with the Piat, who managed to get behind the Tiger and take the Tiger out. That's what we want.
You want space for those stories, like you said.
Yeah, definitely.
And that aspect of stories is another one. So another mechanic that you brought up there. I am shocked and appalled. Subcommandante 73 has been a follower of the show since its very, very early days, and I have a great deal of affection for this man. But now he tells me that rolling more than 3 dice is annoying. Whereas a game where you have a handful of dice to roll, I like that. That's like, ooh, I know if I get a lot of 6s here, it's going well for me.
Yeah, but don't you also know that if you don't get a lot of 6s, so you've got 40 dice and you roll them, and you only get 1 6 in 40 dice, which can happen, and you think, well, that's really terrible.
That's true. But I also know deep down that Subs is lying because he loves Blood Red Skies, and that's a game where you usually throw at least 6 dice looking for and only 6 is count as successes. So there we go. Friends General Haig says difference between an average dice and a D6 is pretty sweet. Oh, old school pro there, the old average dice.
Average dice. We love average dice.
Average dice. For those that don't know, an average dice doesn't have a 1 or a 6 on it. It has 2 3s and 2 2s, giving you the common results. Subs never played Orcs in 40k. Indeed. Bob Edwards, my hands weren't big enough to hold all the Orc dices. And Tony Holton says,
that's why you do need a bucket.
Hung around for World War II, easier to hide than a tank. And a hell of a lot cheaper to make as well. I mean, that's the main reason. They're a lot cheaper to make. Bob Edwards, I like bolt action. One reason is the fact single model can win the game for me or lose it. I've even named some of these models for that personal touch. Yeah, I think so. Subs, I could forgive BRS because I get to play with pretty models. Yes, we'll all sacrifice our principles.
But does he make the noises?
Of course he does. Why else would you play an aeroplane simulation game if you don't make the noises, John?
Oh, that actually. Oh, sorry, you're going to make a noise, John? I don't know.
I was just asking his opinion on the matter.
I thought that was a prompt.
It could well have been, but yeah, I do like making noises.
I mean, the airplane thing does raise another challenge, which we've tried to address differently in Airfix Battles and Mission Command, and go through those again. The old Typhoon with rockets problem.
Problem?
Well,
problem for the Nazis, sir. They don't like it up them.
The problem with rocket firing typhoons. Rocket firing typhoons is a totally different. Well, anyway, rocket firing typhoons. The problem is that the pilots always reported how effective they were at shooting up German tanks.
Yeah.
But when they did the after action analysis, they found that they were just fairly rubbish at killing tanks, particularly.
Well, do you know what? See, this is an interesting piece of historical footnote, and this is where history is a dynamic and living subject. That was certainly the view in the 60s. It is now increasingly clear that the problem with that analysis is it's looking at disabled vehicles after the war. It is not looking at what happened in the moment. And if you were in a Nazi tank, when a Typhoon squadron comes over and fires rockets at the tank column, I'm telling you that tank column became ineffective.
Yes,
they all got out of the tanks, and most of them never got in again.
Well, I mean, one of the main pieces of evidence they have for that is what happened with one particular division. I think the people like if you're getting a much more experienced division like Panzerlehr, 12th SS, and people who've got a higher degree of training, it's not as effective. But what we had to do with Mission Command is initially we went with Typhoon rockets being as relatively ineffective as the historical evidence suggested, and we had to change that because the players just wouldn't accept. In playtesting, they just wouldn't accept that the Typhoons were going to be rubbish. So we had to adjust it, and one of the ways we adjust it addresses your point. Yeah, we adjusted it partly so that when they did a Typhoon attack, it had a very, very big morale effect, so that the crews would abandon the tanks at least temporarily, and then they might come back or they might not come back. And that was a key adjustment we make. Now, we don't tend to bother with that subtlety in Airfix battles because it becomes a bit too complex to do. So for air power in Airfix battles, it's basically, which is a new part of Airfix battles, not in the original game. It's in the bit we're developing now. We've got air power, and basically you can use the aircraft, and it all happens fairly quickly, and it will be effective or not. And there's anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, you can fire at them, and it's all very straightforward and clean because we want the air stuff to be there and quite dramatic, but out of the way fairly quickly because it's really a land forces game. So that's the decision we made in Airfix battles. With Mission Command, it's a bit more complicated. But again, with both of those games, they're both land battle games. You don't want to get too deflected into complicated ways of assessing air power. So the air stuff, you can do the air stuff in even the Mission Command in about 5 minutes start of a turn, and it's gone. Because they're basically land battle. Those are the kind of game design decisions you have to make. You could easily get deflected into going into the complicated detail of how aircraft fight and dogfights and all this kind of stuff. But remember to focus on what your main point is. Land. We want to do the land battles. We want to do in Mission Command. We're doing the command control of combined arms forces. It's our main focus. So we have to stick to that.
Yeah, Callum's far too polite. Callum, what do you want to say?
Sorry, Callum. Yeah.
No. So this is for a specific reason. So on Thursday, I played a game of Drop Zone Command with my friend, and they've changed the way that aircraft work in it. It used to be they flew on the board, did their thing, and flew off. Now that always raised the question with us of, well, what's the point in buying the models? Because it's on the board for 10 seconds.
Yeah. Yes, good point.
So that's just what I was thought was the question really was coming to the point of about that competing thing of writing the rule around aircraft of, well, we want people who've got models, or we want people to buy models, so we want this thing to hang around. But on the flip side, actually in a 100-foot area, 100-yard area, an aeroplane's gone within 10 seconds.
Well, let's just open that up just a little bit to give Alan a bit of room to think on this as well. Is also, you talked about sort of manufacturers' expectation, and specifically miniature war games. In most games, it's an inner box deal. There may be expansion, but people are buying them in kind of reasonably whole units. But miniature games are different in that infinite expandability. So that's the manufacturer expectation and how much you think that drives game design. And I think it very much does, like Callum said, in flagship games, shall we say, the headline games for headline companies. But associated with that are a similar kind of problem, but in a different way, like you just talked about with the Typhoon strikes, is how important is player expectation? Like this is the reason I want to play this game is to feel like I am having a wrestling match. However good a simulation this is, did it meet my expectation? Because if I want to play a wrestling game, when I roll a 6, I want to hit the guy with the chair, or I want to throw him out of the ring. It doesn't matter about it being realistic. It's like there's player expectation is still a big part of that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, with modern game design, most designers who we speak to will say that what they start with when they're starting design is, what is the player experience going to be, which is basically what you were saying is, what's the player expectation of this, and how can we meet that expectation? So absolutely, that's why you're selecting appropriate mechanics that match the player expectation. And if you have something which doesn't match that, then the players will not. That it'll break the illusion. So that like the Typhoon example, where we had, I've got this rocket firing Typhoon squadron, which I think ought to be really effective, and I come in over the battlefield, and then you suddenly find, oh, there wasn't any point in having that. So I now feel let down by the game system, and that's definitely what we're trying to avoid. So we have to try to match expectations. Now, I mean, I think using me as an example of a player with 2 enhanced expectations, probably. If you look at me, if I play Memoir 44, not a game. I mean, I have played quite a lot of it, but I have a real big problem with that, because my expectation is that it will make some attempt at modelling World War II tactics, which it actually
you're being pretty brutal
doesn't.
now. You're being
I
pretty
know,
harsh
but
there.
I'm
A
just
lot
saying
of
from the
people
point,
hold that game in a lot of
yeah, I know.
affection.
But from the point of view of player expectation, me as a player, I feel that if I've got a tank, then the tank fire attenuates over range, because that's what tank fire does. If I'm firing at something with a tank at 2,000 meters, it's different from firing at a tank at something at 200 meters. Whereas in Memoir, tank fire doesn't attenuate range, but artillery fire does. Whereas I'm thinking as a player, historically, if you have a 25-pounder battery and you fire at 10,000 yards and it lands, it has the same explosive force as if you fire it at 2,000. But in Memoir, it doesn't. It goes the other way around. So that's what I mean by your mechanics have to kind of meet that player expectation. I'm too critical because I'm not the target audience of Memoir 44. But that's just an example of how you can grate with somebody's expectation in war games.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that on the simple level, there's the spectrum. You know, most people would broadly agree that you have simulations at one end and you have gameplay at the other end, right? And the more kind of gamey and funny, the more rolling sixes is the winner is at the gamey end.
Yes.
And that's where you have like, this game is not balancing. No, it's not. That's right. And it will be won by the person who rolls a 6 and turn 1. And that is the experience at this end of the spectrum. And at the other end of the spectrum is when I find that the more simulation you get into a game, is the more cumbersome the game becomes. And
well,
I think simplicity is beautiful and hard to achieve if you want to simulate anything.
I don't think that that simulation has to be complex. It depends on what you're trying to simulate. You can, the classic example, you can do a simulation game of World War One, which basically says, right, the Germans will roll the dice, the Allies will roll the dice, whoever gets the 6 first wins. You could do that, and it might actually be, for some people, quite a reasonable simulation. I mean, it's very varied. It's it's a nice simple system, and you could argue that it reflects the kind of chaos that you have in that kind of strategic situation. So simulation doesn't have to mean complexity, but and on the other hand, of course, it does mean that you can get simulation games which are very playable as well. That's why I tend to go the simulation historical modeling versus the kind of Hollywood wargaming, where the simplicity of the Hollywood wargaming is throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's saying we don't care about historicity. We're just going to do rolling loads of d6s and seeing who rolled.
Oh, we're not gonna. I think that they wouldn't say that they didn't care about historicity.
No,
they would say that they will prioritize gameplay. One of the
that's what we've done with Airfix Battle. Sorry to interrupt, but that's what we've done. We've prioritized the quick, streamlined gameplay in Airfix Battles over historical accuracy, and we had to make a lot of compromises with that. So I would never argue that is a historically accurate game. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be a fun World War II themed tactical game. Yeah.
So a game I used to play with some friends back in Lancaster was homebrewed from another skirmish system, which was kind of Crossfire, but for World War One, to give you a context. And one of the points on that where I ran into trouble was, and Bolt Action has the same problem. Most World War II games that play on sort of platoon level are going to have this problem. Is I don't think that there is a meaningful difference to a commander between a German 98K and a British short magazine Lee Enfield. I don't feel that the differences between those two weapons are worth modeling. I run into real problems with the Garand because it's genuinely semi-automatic weapon. And there is that is a different kind of weapon, but it is still basically a rifle.
Yeah.
It's like, right, okay, so what am I going to do with that? And I think that's kind of an interesting one to sort of put there. Is like that sits on a line, I feel, for a lot of people in terms of game design, into which side of this fence you're going to go on. Is, are you going to do something about the US having a fundamentally more rapid fire weapon as a basic infantry weapon, or not?
Yeah, it depends. If you're doing a skirmish game where the actual individual weapon capabilities are going to matter, then you probably have to do something. I mean, counterbalance that argument, of course. Yeah, the Americans have got the repeating rifle, whatever, but they haven't got decent LMG at that level. So they've got a Browning, but they haven't got an MG34 or a Bren. So I mean, you could argue that at least you've got a compensatory advantage for the other guys. So the Americans might have better small arms, better rifles in terms of rate of fire, but the other sides have got better machine guns. So at least you can still balance. You can still balance it.
I suppose you've got that argument throughout history, though. So like, one that springs to mind is the difference between a bow and a longbow in wargaming. The difference is the range, where actually they're used in two very different ways.
Yes.
Yeah, the draw weight is a big. This is going to go in a lot further, mate.
Well, I mean, you know, I wasn't going to go into the kind of doctrine aspect of things. So what?
Interesting.
That is right up to doctrine. I mean, this game attempts to do the doctrine thing, which is.
So to go similarly, if you look at how those squads actually function, one of the things about the American system, and they're using the Browning automatic rifle rather than a true LMG. The thing is, people say this about light machine guns, right? Because they've watched a lot of bloody movies and propaganda footage. Is that people firing 3 to 5 round bursts with machine guns? So the fact that you got a 250 round belt and you could just go, so well, you're just putting a whole lot of bullets through the same window. You know, that the actual difference is not nearly as big as you think in terms of its operational use. But they have a much tighter doctrine in that the BAR is a much more portable weapon, and they're much more maneuver focused. And their squad, the output, the bullets per minute from the squad in action is better. It genuinely is better with the whole squad combined. Germany similarly, but a German infantry squad is largely 6 or 7 guys feeding an LMG.
Or two LMGs late war, but yes,
late war, 2 LMGs, absolutely. But they're largely, the riflemen are fundamentally there to defend the machine gun and to keep it supplied with ammo, whereas the British still rely quite heavily on their rifle strength and the precision and accuracy of their riflemen. These are 3 very different ways of using what is essentially a machine gun and 8 other guys and a corporal.
Yes,
and they're very different.
So I mean, in a way, in game design terms, the decision you're making there in modeling all of that is: are you going to delve into those kind of details? Is your skirmish game going to look at how each individual national doctrine ran platoon level combats? And if you are going to do, if that's your focus, we want to see what's better and what's worse, then you need to differentiate how the doctrine and the use of those weapons, how you model that. But if it's more a question of, well, they're roughly the same type of thing, and it's a bit of a knockabout, relatively simple, straightforward, quick hour-long skirmish game where you don't really care too much about. I mean, I was thinking something like very British Civil War type game, where you don't need to delve into the complication of what type of rifles and things people have got. It's a knockabout, relatively straightforward game where you're.
Well, there's not even agreed set of rules for that. It's
exactly.
It's a concept game rather than system.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back to the. So Wayne Higgins says, been up there for a while. Wondering, you guys enjoy making models and painting, or is playing the games more important? For me, this comes up a few times. I'm first a gamer, then a painter, and lastly a model maker. despite the channel's name, because I like the name modeling for advantage. John came up with it years ago.
It's your fault, John.
Did I?
Modeling for advantage? Yeah, not as the channel name, but you were talking about something, and you'd said like, oh, are all your guys kneeling? Are you modeling for advantage or something?
Oh, right.
Maybe playing Hill Team, and I was like, I'm not that good a modeler, but I really like that phrase. I'm going to use it.
That came around with true line of sight. That's where that phrase came.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That become very, very significant. So I'm fundamentally a gamer first and foremost in all of its forms. I even enjoy party games. They don't have to be Secret Hitler. I'll play other ones. But if they've got a World War II theme, all the better. And the modeling comes last. Callum.
I was more of a gamer. And then as my gaming opportunities died off, I became more of a modeler. And now I'm starting to swing back towards gaming again, now that I'm starting to get some regular games in. So I think gaming of opportunity is more my situation. And
you're not afraid to saw a metal head off a miniature and put a plastic one, are you? I mean, so that's...
I sawed the arm off of this dreadnought like 20 odd years ago and rearranged it. So yeah, I'm more than happy to carve up a £40 model to make it what I want it to be.
That's good. I just like buying plastic miniatures.
Yeah.
I don't really do any of the other bits, so
Right,
it doesn't really matter. No, I'd say I'm a modeler and painter first. No, it's all together, man. I love the modeling and painting because I want to play a game. So all of it, I love it as a whole, equally.
Alan,
I believe it, I actually started as a modeler way back before I got into games.
When you were a lad.
When I was a lad, I used to do the tanks. I used to make little model Napoleonic ships out of balsa wood and use them. But I was doing that in order to do a Napoleonic naval game.
Yeah.
And now really I'm not a modeler at all. And as you can tell from my little collection of Airfix stuff, I'm quite happy to play games without any painting on them at all. So sacrilege, I know, but then again, most of my stuff, a lot of my playing is playtesting, and playtesting you're allowed to use unpainted stuff.
Yeah,
not when they sell rattle cans for a couple of quid, mate. That's not good enough. You can at least spray it olive drab or something. Yeah.
Well, it comes in a colour. Look, what do you want? It's got colour on it. Look,
I'm not because John objects to the fact that I don't paint the underneath of my tanks.
Yeah, wrong.
It's like I'm wrong. Average dice, yeah. I mean, rolling to move as a mechanic and a board game with a D6, that is game-breakingly painful when it goes bad, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is. I remember there was a certain set of rules we were playing. It wasn't one of mine, where it was one of those you roll to move things, and if you get a 6, you can roll again and move even further because you get. And we had a situation where a guy rolled to move a pack 40. An in position pack 40, and they rolled, and the umpire ruled that you could move it across a field and over a hedge and put it into position, manhandling it.
Oh, manhandling it
before my half track could shoot, and I've never got over that. It's one of those scars.
It's one of those scars. Does the Royal Tournament.
It was just mad. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. It was just crazy. Anyway,
do you still roll a 1 on average dice if you say anything but a 1?
Yeah, is that the curse? Even though there's not 1 on the dice. Yeah, I reckon so.
Yeah. Raccoon firing tycoons. This is where far back there. Rotatory mother hen called me. I'm not sure what that's about. It's like the player expectations. SS troops are still better. In a lot of cases, took massive casualties.
Yeah.
Well, for me. This is about a lack of nuance in the system, and actually, quite simple systems can still do this. You don't. WRG days. You've got A class troops. You've got B class troops. You've got C class troops and D, and A class troops are just better. But even their Renaissance rules made made a broader range of categories for things like Royalist cavalry, very high morale, very poor controllability. You know, they're even in relatively straightforward systems of categorizing. SS is an interesting one because it's about motivation and aggressiveness, not competence. And that, in terms of modeling that can be difficult, but you just make it as plus to these roles. It's actually minus to these ones.
Yeah.
Exactly. When you're aggressive, you're also reckless. You take risks. And the casualties in
Phil Barker with the WRG stuff, I think he did hedge his bets quite nicely because he did expect people to do their own research and allocate ratings accordingly, which means it's a bit of a get out, but yeah. And you've got some SS troops which are relatively skilled, but it's
well, if you look at the casualty figures, the casualties are horrific in the SS.
Oh yeah.
But you get that. Then you got, I think, lots of games.
You got 17th SS in Normandy. They're generally not even as good as average Wehrmacht because they just hadn't had the training and didn't have the equipment either.
No,
it depends how new they are as well. You know,
if
you look
and they were all a bunch of dicks.
And they were all a bunch of dicks. They're all Nazis, mate.
To an extent, true.
I was just going to say, Napoleonic, the elite units, if they're freshly raised, they're not going to be as good as a regiment that's been fighting in the peninsula for 12 years.
So again, this is interesting. This is where your history gets nuanced. How do you get to be a grenadier in a Napoleonic army? What's the criteria?
Generally, you're the tallest.
You're big enough. That's absolutely right. These regiments made of big men, and that if you do that in a group of 1,000 that are going to fight with a bayonet, that is an advantage, no matter how skilled they are. They're big guys.
There's an important game design aspect which I'll just mention here, and that is my view is its context is everything in game design. So I am not a great fan of broad systems that you can then apply to lots and lots of different battles and lots of different eras. I tend to resist that because context is everything. One of the things when you start looking at the Normandy, I did a lot of research on the Normandy campaign because of Mission Command Normandy, and you find, of course, you got all these British divisions. You got the 3rd British Division, which assaults on D-Day, and they have trained for 2 years to do this, but they're completely green. They haven't fought before. So
but this is one of my big.
How do you reflect the fact that you've got some green troops who are really, really, really well trained, whereas you could have like a bunch of German guys who are supposedly superior German infantry, but they're green and they've only been doing training for like 3 months or whatever. Or you've got a bunch of Russians. You've got Russian Guard units at Kursk, and some of those Russian Guard units at Kursk have literally recruited people off the streets directly into the units, and they are Guard units, and they've literally got maybe a couple of weeks, 3 weeks maybe, in the unit, and they're Guard units. You've got to, so context is everything. So you have to put something in your design that if you're going to do something which is historically accurate, and that's where the complexity comes in, to reflect that kind of.
But it's also that armies are different. Sorry, I say armies are different. So one of the things that always peeves me is that people talk about the redcoats at Waterloo. That's not the same army that fought in the peninsula. Most of those guys who left, they've been disbanded, and they were fresh recruits. Then it's the same for World War II. The BEF and the guys going into Normandy were two. Yeah, some of the BEF were there, but they were two different armies. For all intents and purposes of both being British.
When you talk about that kind of, and there are times training is a really interesting one, right? Because it's this one thing that comes up all the time in war games. Talk about say, these bloody conscript units, and just about every major war there's ever been, almost all the guys fighting in it were conscripted. Right, conscript does not mean poor quality troops. This is a really bad label almost everybody that fought in World War II was a conscript, even the commanders. So that's a funny way of sort of looking at that problem. But you get the situation. So like 1914, it is often said of the BEF that landed in France, it was the best equipped, best trained, most capable army that Britain had ever would or ever has put into the field. It was just trained to do a completely different job. It was trained to fight, on the plains of Afghanistan or wherever there was going to be a problem in an open order maneuver, very high rates of fire, a very steady, firm drill that was it killed the Mahdi's troops magnificently at Omdurman. I'd learnt a little bit from the Boers and was a top class army. And yeah, but we're now moving into the meat grinder war, and you can't have that level of training anymore. But then you get so you look at that, but then the training that the British Army had done, the BEF that goes into France in 1940, is completely the wrong type of training. A big problem with the Allied forces is they're just not responsive enough to what the Germans are doing, and they just keep falling back for lack of information. I mean, the one thing that's really missing in war games, I think, is how important intelligence is, and that knowledge of the enemy. It's not about what you're fighting today. It's about what might you have to fight tomorrow, where what's happening over there, and over there really affects what I'm going to do now. That's
a really difficult thing to address in shrink wrapped games. Very, very difficult. It's not so difficult in professional wargaming because you
build that into the scenario.
You can build it into the scenario, but in shrink wrap games, particularly where you've got no umpire, it's something that most designers will maybe pay lip service to a bit with some hidden chits or something, but you can't. It's so difficult, and that's why we use umpires in Mission Command. I mean, the classic thing we have in Mission Command, the start of a Mission Command game will generally be one side sets up its troops because they're the sides that are advancing and the enemy can see them, and on the opposite side there is nothing. You can't see anything. There's no enemy visible at all. And that's a common situation in World War II. So you've got that situation where you just don't know where the enemy is, and finding our players now know how to deal with that. So they know the importance of reconnaissance. So you don't just
live bait, as it may also be known.
Drive until you are shot at, and then hopefully radio back about what shot at you.
But you were talking about the tactics in 1914 being wrong, and the same thing happened with the RAF in the Inter-Year Wars. That planes were seen as there's not going to be another European war so long as they're only throwing spears at us. This Sopwith Camel will do.
Sopwith Camel was an awesome plane in 1917,
and everything. But one thing I think you don't get in games is the fact that you're talking about the Garand and the Lee Enfield and everything, is that there's an arms race, and that one side always has the upper hand on the other side. And you see that during the planes during World War One. They brought out the Fokker, the Fokker triplanes. So we brought out the Camels. They brought out the Albatross. So they brought out I think I got it the wrong way around, but that every plane was better.
And the DRI's in there somewhere, right?
Yeah, and so. So I think that this whole even-sided gaming is something that's not necessarily historically representative.
No, but then they would say, like, at the other end of it is for me is a medium tank is a medium tank in a whole lot more ways than a Panzer IV is not a Sherman. They are so alike in so many ways and different in a very small number of ways.
Well, we reflect that in the Mission Command because we're dealing with a battle group. We're dealing with battle group level, not individual tank level. Basically, a Sherman is in a tactical sense. A Sherman is the equivalent of a Panzer IV in Normandy. We got there. I think we have no difference between the two, because at this scale, where the one tank represents 4 4 individual tanks. One tank model represents 4 individual tanks, and generally you're going to go with a company. So you've probably got 3 or 4 tank models in your unit. It actually the differences between those tanks don't actually matter at all. So we don't reflect that.
I mean, they certainly can at critical level, at critical moments, and if you were to compare a Panther with a Valentine, one is a 1942 medium tank that's really past its best, and the other is top end of the range.
Well, if you're comparing, if you're in the open areas of the steppes of Russia, and you've got a Panther and you're up against a T-34, the differences are critical because your Panther will outrange that T-34.
How the hell did you get onto comparing tanks?
I know, it's bad, isn't it?
Because it's about which aspects of the military engagement that which bits do you want to model, right? Which bits of the rule do you want to take, and how far do you take it? And I think for me, because I have all kinds of issues around people and the way that they play. I mean, for one thing, I feel that most people play bigger and longer games than they actually enjoy. I think they play bigger and longer games than they enjoy, and therefore they usually and commonly don't finish them. And it wasn't the experience it could be, because John and I for years now have been playing smaller games on a 4x4 board, doing it to camera, so we finish them, and we've shrunk most of the games down to take less than 2 hours to play, which will come out at a video length between 1 and 2 hours, which some people might actually get to the end of sometimes. And I certainly me, I'm much happier playing that size of game than I ever was on a 6x4 foot table, and generally not finishing or rushing to finish at the end. What do you think, John? I'm
all right with that system. That style of play. It's just the opponent.
It comes to player expectation again, I think. I mean, as I said, we have this group in Frome. It's probably between 20 and 30 people. I mean, they don't all come each time, but the expectation there is we'll play a day, so we will play a long game. That's the expectation, and we wouldn't want to be starting at 10 and playing a 2-hour game, because that wouldn't meet the needs of the group. So the context is very different.
You are very correct. It is all about expectation. My expectations of this live stream was that it was going to be 1 hour long.
Yes, absolutely.
And you need to cater for that.
Yeah, we've run way over, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
So what I think we should do, as Subs has just pointed out there, that's why Kaiser gave Johnny B 500 points of Brits against 1,000 points of Germans. That was this week's Sport Action video. I didn't do that to him because I'm mean. I did it to him because he's ginger. You need to understand there is a difference there. No,
good excuse if you lost, Johnny. Good excuse if you lost.
I nearly won.
He nearly won in turn 3 in a 6-turn game.
I was trying not to spoil the ending.
It was a campaign game, was why it was so unequal. And that just to say very briefly on that, because I think it's an interesting one in relation to game design. In these campaigns games that John and I have been playing, we are sharing lists and talking about them beforehand. Because it's a campaign game where the forces could be really unequal, we try and make the game that we play not be horrifically one-sided. We try and go into it with a kind of, right, if this is a game that's going to feature a lot of tanks, then let's both build lists that have gotten a large amount of anti-tank equipment in them for the size of the list, so that the game just doesn't freak out one-sided. And
I mean,
so on
if what you said was true just then, you'd be getting somebody else in to play the British if you didn't want it to be horrifically lopsided.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think what this has shown though is I think we should get Alan back in the new year, and maybe I should get some questions from you guys beforehand that we can put up there for discussion, because we did kind of want. But I like the conversation to go where it's going to go rather than
I think
questions, because we then talk about things that people are interested in. But activation came up and alternating activation came up, and I think that's a really good question to ask, because modern games have really moved on a lot with this. There's a lot of different systems out there, and I think it's something to look at. The Kaiser Stomp list, absolutely. So what we get to with the hobby, I put about 1.5 of emulsion on this building. Only 11.5 to go. Callum.
Yeah, I've done all the painting bit. I've just got to do the rest of the transfers now, and then
Nice.
Very nice.
give it a coat of varnish. So happy with that.
Yeah, Black Tempers. I've done the thing and the other thing, and now they're good to go.
Yeah, and my tank is still finished. It's still finished.
Perfect.
Absolutely finished. Yeah,
As finished as it's ever going to be.
Yep.
Alan, just remind the young people at home, the handsome devilry that they are, if they're interested in wargaming and your games, Kingmaker, where can they buy it yet? Where could they get that?
Kingmaker comes out in March 2023 for Kickstarter. It'll be in retail a couple of months after that, and it'll be from Gibson's Games. If you want more information or to log your interest, Gibson's Games website is the best place to go, and they'll take your email and then keep you informed. That's the best way.
And the 2 World War II games you talked about tonight, first was Airfix Battles. Where could they find that?
Airfix Battles from Modifius or from your local game shop. That would be the best way to get it.
Yeah, and it comes with standees and what have you.
Or indeed Airfix. You can get it through the Airfix shop as well. Actually, Airfix website. And
the Mission Command Normandy.
Best to get hold of me if you want a copy of that, because it's not well. It is on Lulu. You can do it with. I can do it on Lulu, or indeed Wargame Vault.
She's still around, Lulu.
Online. Lulu is still around, just about. Yeah.
Never heard of them. Send links. Send links.
Wargame Vault is your best bet, actually. I think nowadays.
Tomorrow we'll release one of the interviews from Selwig. I think it's the guys who run the UK Bolt Action Open. I think is the one I put up for tomorrow. Friday will be Tanks, World of Tanks and Miniatures games with the artillery, the self-propelled artillery, which it's not just that they're new models, it's that it's new rules for within that game, which is not a simulation, I hasten to add. It's an extremely gamey game where rolling dice and skull rolling sixes is what it's all about.
What you need. Even
more so with the Hummel. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. Oh, I have the calendar. I might even be able to tell you who we've got. Who have we got on the 50th? Oh, we've got Dwayne from Plastic Crack Gaming, the Battletech and Orc guy, Irish fella. You've seen him on the show a few times. So he's always interesting to talk to about why Battletech is still the same horrifically complicated game it was 40 years ago when I first played it. But they've made a simple version, but no one plays it. All right, guys. That's it from all of us. Take care.
Cheers. May you always roll sixes.
Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.